All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for sticking around, for joining us for this very special panel discussion session. So we only have an hour, so we're going to have to try to be as efficient as possible with our time. And I'd like to start maybe the first 10 minutes or so having this conversation with Dr. Wendy James-Aldridge. And I have a co-moderator, Ms. Patricia Scanlan, who will kind of take over during the second half of our session, so the last 30 minutes. So I want to start with really kind of the perspective from the UTRGV educators, but not just UTRGV, because we do have our legacy institution, University of Texas Pan American. And so I'll kind of turn it over to Dr. Aldridge to kind of set the tone for us and to introduce the topic about this collaboration with Gladys Porter Zoo from sort of the educator's perspective. And really the goal is to share lessons learned. I think we have a lot of faculty that might be interested in kind of experiential learning and service learning, right? Because the experiences that we have as educators, we're working closely with Gladys Porter Zoo, our community partner. So Wendy, let's go ahead and start with you. If you can sort of tell us the history about when you started working closely with the Gladys Porter Zoo, I think that'll be really great for you to share your experiences. And please keep in mind that this session, really, we're targeting faculty, trying to offer them advice. And I think you sharing your experiences will help us better understand how we can approach experiential learning. So Wendy, I'll go ahead and let you take the lead now.
The story of me getting involved with the Gladys Porter Zoo is a bit intricate. I did not start when I was hired at then Pan American University to do any work at all at the zoo. I went to the zoo as a civilian. I visited the zoo. But my background is in experimental psychology. But in the meantime, I had gotten acquainted and familiar with the work with sign language in grade 8s. And after any opportunity that I got, I introduced that material into some of my classes. And I was encouraged repeatedly by students who knew my interest in it to, why don't I do this myself? Why don't I do this myself? Why don't I? And I say, look around. Do you see a primate lab here on campus? No. And then students would come back and say, but there is the zoo. And so ultimately it was the students who sort of kept nudging me to contact the Gladys Porter Zoo. And at that time, it was during that period of time when there were young grade 8s up in the nursery of the zoo. Grade 8 mothers were not being particularly good about taking care of their young at the time. So they were being cared for by human caretakers up in the nursery. That provided for me subjects for a potential sign language study. And I approached the then director of the zoo, and after some conversations back and forth, he allowed me to do that work. I studied American Sign Language with 3 little grade 8s, 2 orangutans and a gorilla. And I did have some students work with me at the time. I think at one point I had 5 students, and we were able to split into 2 teams, and we would drive from Edinburgh to Brownsville, sometimes 5 days a week. Most often it was about 2 days a week. But it was my own research, and it was something I was interested in. I could involve a few students with it. There were lots of logistical issues. Students had to be TB tested, hepatitis C tested, because we were having physical contact with the animals. We were a real serious pain to the keepers because we were interrupting their routine, and they would have to make accommodations for us. And but I think it was very interesting work. We learned a lot, and the results of that study are a whole different story. But eventually, I stopped. All of my subjects had gone somewhere else. That is the way the SSP works things. The zoo animals get moved around to other zoos to maintain genetic diversity and so forth, as you've heard from Dr. Burchfield. I also took a couple of years off to have a couple of primates of my own. So I was away from the zoo for a little bit. But when I came back, I decided that it was time for me to change my orientation with the way I interacted with the zoo. Like I said, we had interfered with zookeepers. We had been graciously accommodated uh, by zoo administration and zoo staff. Um, but they got a lot of publicity. Channel 4, Channel 5 seemed to really love us. But as far as the zoo getting any real benefit from my work, that was probably pretty limited. And so what I started doing was asking zoo staff, is there something that you would like some information about that I could help you with? And at that point, I think Dr. Burchfield was the first person to suggest, yes, we want to know what's going on in the gorilla island. Because at that point, our founder gorillas, Lamidoc and Katanga, were living out there, along with a troop of what were then called Celebes macaques. I think they're Sulawesi macaques now. And 3 stump-tailed macaques. And every once in a while, crazy things would erupt. Just everything would erupt out there. But by the time it started, it was already started. So what I did was change the nature of what I wanted to do at the zoo. Instead of working just at the zoo, I wanted to work for the zoo. And once I did that, I was also modifying the way I taught my courses. And I don't know, students out there, any of you that are listening to this, I don't think you appreciate the kind of guinea pigs you end up being each time as we fiddle with our courses and play with this and that. But one thing that I was really interested in doing, particularly with the animal behavior course that I taught, was to give the students something to do that directly involved animals. Instead of just reading about them in their textbook, even watching excellent videos that I could provide for them in class. I was really hungry for them to have something real to do with animals. And once I broached the zoo about doing work that would provide some information that would be useful for them, I further devised a way to provide them with some more help to get that information. And that was to make zoo projects a part of both the animal behavior course that I taught, and then later when I started teaching the primate behavior course. Everybody did a project at the zoo. And early on, especially in the primate behavior course, the projects were the gorillas and the chimpanzees, the groups that I was personally studying at the time. The mechanics of that were not easy. I was still using the zoo research as my own research. And in a way, I was turning the students in those classes into my research assistants. And it was also important that the students be trained well, that we be able to trust their data. And because not only was I using it in my own research, but I was funneling that information back to zoo administration so that when appropriate, they could use that information to make informed decisions about animal husbandry issues. I would train my students partly in class. We would always take a couple of 3 weeks in class to work on observational behavior methods, technology, vocabulary, so that they knew about the methods that they would be using to collect data themselves. The technique that I use most often is focal animal sampling, because I'm working with relatively small groups of animals that are pretty easy to identify individually. And so I had the students split into two groups randomly. Half of the class would be assigned to chimpanzees, half of the class would be assigned to gorillas. They had to go and learn to tell their individual animals apart. They learned their house names. They learned my code numbers for them. And they learned a list of 27 behavior categories that I have been using on a regular basis as I study these groups of animals. And then I trained each student individually to collect data the way I collect data. We did individual interreliability tests so that when they got through with that interreliability test, I would hand them their data sheets and they could collect data on their own. But by that point, I trusted them. I knew that they would be collecting data just as though I would be if I were standing there observing the animals. It was a really interesting experience when word got out that you got to work at the zoo if you took this class, and it generated a lot of word of mouth interest. I had sometimes to close enrollment. I would tell students, I would send them an email and say, this is what this is, and it's going to be the hardest work you're ever going to love. And that's kind of what happened. So I moved from doing my own work at the zoo to working for the zoo and incorporating my own research into what students could do and giving them experience. And a lot of that grew into advanced research seminars and master's theses and all kinds of good stuff. But that's how I got started.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Wendy, for providing that information. And I'd like to now have our other UTRGV faculty and also Linda Salinas from Harlingen CISD to join our conversation. So from your perspective, so you all, you designed these courses, right? You engage in experiential learning. And so I'm curious if you have any advice for our attendees. So maybe, we can start with Linda. Linda, could you kind of just describe, as an educator at Harlingen CISD, how you incorporate experiential learning and this partnership with Gladys Porter Zoo in your everyday classroom activities?
Sure, thank you so much. So I think it starts off with being creative. A lot of what you receive as a teacher is guided with resources, lessons, and activities that it's given to you. It's provided. These are great things you can provide to the students, but it's very traditional learning. Read this, have them fill this out, and there's not much creativity or opportunity for students to really dive in to content, at least not yet. I know slowly there is a transition in the way education is being delivered right now, with more collaborative groups, more opportunities for students to work together and to create. So thankfully, I'm now at a STEM campus, and being at this STEM campus, I'm less focused on STAR tested assessments, even though I know they're very valued and important, but the courses that I teach don't focus on exams or tests. They focus on teaching students real content, real world experiences, and creating a lot of solutions for challenges in the real world. So as you mentioned, experiential learning, it's hands-on, it's doing things for the community, it's being given challenges so that they can brainstorm ideas and find ways to solve real world problems. Because I've always felt that as a teacher, I'm not a keeper of knowledge, right? I'm not the internet, and I'm not the one that's going to just spoon feed answers out to students. They don't really need a teacher to learn. They need a teacher to guide and to facilitate and to more so inspire them to want to think. Because especially with technology today, knowledge is at your fingertips. With a simple Google search, you can find videos, you can find lessons and activities to learn things. But going out there and actually doing it, going out there and solving problems in the world is what's going to make the difference. And so with the projects that we did with Gladys Porter Zoo, it was really challenging my students to come up with a solution for different animals at the zoo. not a one size fits all. It was, this is the specific animal you're being assigned. You need to do research and learn about the traits of that animal. What is their life like in the wild? What are some problems they experience while living in human care? And what can you do as a 6th grade student to fix that, or to help and to provide the animal with a better quality of life while they are living in human care? And so it's not something that is out there for anybody to just, oh, it's ready to go and I can just deliver it. As teachers, we have to be creative enough to look for those partnerships, reach out to the community, and find ways to make learning hands-on, to make it that much more in-depth and allow them to dig deeper in their learning.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Linda. Much appreciated. So now a question for maybe Lucia and Claudia can take over, since you all have been involved, with the zoo, working with the zoo in your classes. Maybe we'll start with Lucia. Can you talk about your experience taking your students to the zoo and how you approached the animal behavior course that you taught?
Yes, yes, I agree a lot with what Mrs. Salinas was saying. Definitely the students in my course, because they're in biology majors, so they also had to research the conditions of the animals that were in the wild, and same thing, research their habits and then compare them on how they're behaving in captivity, be able, with the guidance of Dr. Aldridge, also to recognize if they're mating behaviors, playful behaviors, aggressive behaviors, but also to be in touch with nature. Sometimes these students, even though they're already college students, they have been in a career that, oh, I want to become a medical doctor, and they're kind of away from the nature part of their biology major. And so sometimes students were kind of hesitant when they were like, oh, you guys need to start going to the zoo and you need to have a commitment and you need to put this many hours. But at the end, they really like it. They had the reflective essay and, oh, now I'm gonna miss going to the zoo. And so it's very like a very feelable to, as a instructor, see how the students enjoy it. Again, at the beginning, kind of struggle a little bit, but at the end, they love it. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Lucia. So Kathleen Mcwhorter, Kathy, I know. So Kathy is a lecturer in the Department of Psychological Science. She teaches research methods, statistics, social psychology, just to name a few. She probably teaches, I don't know how many courses. But Kathy, could you share with us your experience? And so the conference is called, right, Animal Behavior Meets Social Science. So I think a lot of people maybe who are very much interested in human behavior might not understand, why would a psychology department offer an opportunity to interact with or partner with Gladys Porter Zoo? Can you talk about your experience teaching, having your students go to Gladys Porter Zoo, made their reactions, things like that?
Absolutely. So I do teach a lot of courses. And one thing that I always like to incorporate is some sort of like active learning that I just kind of started doing intuitively as soon as I started teaching. And I did it with all my classes, like with social psychology. I have students break a social norm, for example, to feel what it's actually like to do that. And so what I've learned, when students actually get to experience these things that we're reading about from our textbooks and talking about in class, that learning kind of sticks longer. And I'd be willing to bet that any student who's taken a course with me, well, social psychology with me, will never forget what a social norm is, because, they feel that embarrassment or just discomfort, right? Doing something out of the norm, unexpected from them. But when it came to research methods, I wanted to also incorporate this active learning, and the opportunity with the zoo came up, and it was the perfect opportunity for my students to go from the classroom, where we're talking about, naturalistic observation, for example. So we get to learn about it through lectures, through videos, and Dr. Aldridge even, came to class and graced us with her presence there. And so they go from the classroom, where we're learning about these things, where now they're actually getting to put them into practice. And I just, something magical happens when the students actually get to, live what they're learning. And it is a lot of work. It is a lot more work than just taking multiple choice tests and even writing a simple paper. But it's something that they take away with them that will stay with them for a long time. And I don't know, I'm a very big advocate for this active learning. So in terms of my class, research methods, of course, there's a lot more to it than naturalistic observation, but that's kind of what we focused on. So they learned, you know, not only that, but also the importance of, let's say, inter-reader reliability. Very important when you're doing observational research, or even randomization. You know, they get to see firsthand why these things that we learn about in research methods are important, not only in, you know, animal behavior, which we're focusing on here, but even when it comes to like human behavior, how these things can apply in a variety of fields, not just in psychology. So my experience with it was very positive. Unfortunately, the pandemic cut it short, but it's definitely something I'd love to do again in the future. Plus, the students like spending some class time at the zoo, which, I mean, who could blame them, right? It's much more fun at the zoo than in the classroom for hours at a time. So it was a really great experience.
Thank you, Kathy. And Claudia. So Claudia we're very excited that Claudia, so she's a part-time lecturer in the Department of Psychological Science. But what's really special about Claudia is she was actually a undergraduate, right? Claudia, you did your undergraduate at UT Pan Am at the Legacy Institution. Then she did graduate work and graduated with her master's degree in experimental psychology from UTRGV. Dr. Aldridge is your mentor. I think you would agree with that statement, right? Dr. Aldridge is a mentor and an inspiration to you, and you worked very closely with her. Could you kind of describe your experience working with Dr. Aldridge at the zoo from the perspective of the student? What was it like in your classes and in your research?
So yeah, it's like how Dr. Aldridge described it. You know, you get excited, you hear about this class, you get to go to the zoo, you get to see the chimpanzees and the gorillas, but you don't realize how much work it is until you actually start going to the zoo and start trying to collect that data, or just the beginning part, just trying to identify the animals, because it's really funny now thinking about it. Now when you tell me, like, do the gorillas all look the same? They do not look the same to me at all. They're very different personality-wise, physical-wise. But in the beginning, it's very hard. Like for a student, they all look the same. So it's awesome to get to experience, I guess, the different levels of how to collect the data, how to look at the animals and identify them. So we went through all the different steps. And I feel as a student, it's really awesome, because from going back to the class and just reading about it and learning about it, but then going to the actual zoo and actually doing it, it's a whole different experience. Like everyone was saying, it actually, I feel it's a bigger importance. It's just really important for students to feel that and to understand how this can be done in the real world. What you learn in the books, you can actually apply it to the real world. And not just that, but I think when you actually go and you actually learn all the animals, you learn their behaviors, and you actually get to pass your inter-observer reliability test with Dr. Aldridge, and you feel like, okay, now I can really collect this data. And I think for me, the most important part of it all was this data that I'm collecting is not just another assignment. This is to help the zoo. This data can be a part of somebody's study that can help the zookeepers plan for different things. Like for my thesis study, it could help the zookeepers plan for just in case another member passes away or another member has to leave, they get to already know how these group members will react. So I think the importance of them realizing that the data that they're collecting is actually really important, and it could be useful for the zoo and also for the university. So I think it's just like everyone's saying, the students actually need to go out there and actually see the animals in person, actually look at all the data collection methods, look at all different kinds of animals, and try to get to know them to show the world how important these animals can be, and how important the zoo can be for not just the university, but for the whole world, just trying to help endangered species.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Claudia. So we're going to transition now to Patty, who is the co-moderator for the session. And when we discussed this session, we realized that we have this really special opportunity. So I know that, thanks to the Office of Engaged Scholarship and Learning, the Office of Community Engagement, I think UTRGV, a big mission is to empower and interact with our community partners. And so we're very fortunate that at the Gladys Porter Zoo, we have Dr. Burchfield, of course, we have Dr. Aldridge, we have Patty Scanlan, and really they have a presence in both. They understand academia, they've taught, they've worked with academic institutions, and they're also Gladys Porter Zoo. So for the next 30 minutes, I think I'm going to turn it over to Patty, and I think it'll be really exciting to hear from Dr. Aldridge, Dr. Burchfield, and Patty, and perhaps others, to really talk about from their perspective how they see the zoo's role in this, experiential learning and really community engagement. So Patty, I'll let you go ahead and take over the session now.
No pressure. Where's my brown bag? Well, I'm going to call on Dr. Burchfield and Dr. Aldridge because we are all three both in a zoological setting, and though I'm not officially a teacher, I'm a teacher. And watching Miss Salinas' kids' presentation in room B, she had me almost in tears. I think I'm going to cry now. And it was just one of those, Ashley, repeat it and I'll know where to find you. It was one of those experiences that, I've done it before. And, like we spoke about summer team programs and camps, and I've taught the camp, but her kids, wow, talk about they were incredible. And what is wrong with me? Dr. Aldridge, don't look at me. They really, really threw me into just that whole other level of, educating. Yeah, I'm in the university and I'm trying to educate myself at the same time. But that was the whole point of why we're here. Like Dr. Burchfield said, yes, conservation, yes, building these breeding groups, but those kids, educating those children, they're our future. They're the ones that are going to take my spot. They're the ones that are going to take, Ashley's spot eventually. And they taught me. They really did. And I know Dr. Burchfield's taught his fair share of courses. I think, I'm going to say this out loud, I probably shouldn't, but Dr. Gill and I were talking yesterday, and remember your mammalogy class, or was it a herpetology class that Ashley and I took with you, Pat? We were getting ready for an exam and he hands us a single exam and we're looking at him like, wait a minute, we paid for this class. We're not proctoring your class. I want my own test. And, he's had the opportunity to students along the way. I mean, Ashley started out as a summer teen and went through his courses in the university, and she's a biologist now, and she's, heading up the reptile house with Clint. And it's just amazing to see what he's done while he's been here, not just with the animals, but with the people that he works with. And Dr. Aldridge, my goodness, like my background's in hoofstock and, jumping into primates. You're my queen, you're my mentor. I'm gonna have to fight Claudia for you. And well, you know what, we're both gonna have to fight little miss over there that you're spending all that time with. But you're just learning so much from you as well. Again, primates from a distance, but hoofstock had my heart. And, I can say that they still do, but now it's a little bit more divvied up. Primates have got a nice corner in that little heart of mine. But yes, you look at Claudia, you've touched Claudia, you've got her primed and ready to go for a whole nother generation of students coming in that she's lecturing. Why am I, you know what, Dr. Gill, I was supposed to stir the pot and get these two talking because I know that they've got some fantastic lectures and stories among the two of them. And I'm taking up the whole series. So I'm going to pass it over to either one of you that want to jump in and cut me off. I think, who needs to unmute him? Dr. Gill?
Try now.
don't know.
We did ask to unmute.
Maybe it's the microphone.
Estella, are you able to unmute Dr. Burchfield?
You'll need to unmute.
There we go.
Good.
There we go. First, I want to say that Dr. Aldrich was my professor.
I was hoping you wouldn't say that.
Well, I was actually older than she was, but I went to school for so long. There are a lot of my colleagues in the teaching profession that were actually my teachers. So anyway, you know, one of the earlier presenters in this segment talked about active learning, and Dr. Ray Ramirez at UT Brownsville for many years did what was called tactile learning, where he actually had students doing things in the outdoors, in the field, whether it was at the zoo or Camp Lula Sam's. But again, the point was made earlier, if you do it, if you experience it, you retain it. And I think that's a really important concept in terms of getting people out and actually doing the studies like Claudia did in terms of observing the gorillas, seeing the differences in the individual animals, and learning to look, learning to observe, learning to record details. If you go back in history, the early naturalists kept journals, and most of them were very good artists. And the two things seem to go together, being a pretty good artist and a biologist or naturalist, because all those early journals were very detailed and very well done. And that was before photography, that was before movies, that was before videos. So the whole learning to look and teaching people to appreciate what they see once they do look. That's the wonderful thing. And the really neat thing about out of doors education, and whatever field that is, whether it's botany or zoology, marine biology, the out of doors education involves the actual doing of things, and those lessons are retained. But again, it's a lifelong process. People that get into the field of biology or animal behavior, you can discover something new every day. You can always learn something new, and you have to keep it going, or you become dated. That's what I loved about teaching. It forced me to keep current on all the literature and whatever I was teaching. So it wasn't like I taught or I studied this 30 years ago. No, you're keeping track of what's going on in the journals. And if you're in zoology, everything's changing so rapidly, particularly in the taxonomic aspects because of genetics. But it's exciting, it's neat, it's new. I mean, we have cryo zoos. We have zoos with stored embryos of animals that are already extinct. And some of them have actually been reproduced in vitro in the test tubes. So the zoos of the future may be a very different thing, a combination of living animals and animals that are produced from test tubes. But again, we have to follow any option we can to preserve as much biodiversity as we can while we're able. Wendy?
I might add at this point that while I made the work at the zoo part of my own personal research program, I did try to make it relevant to what the zoo needed to know, collecting information that would at some point prove useful. And that happened on a number of occasions. Having students contribute to that work was important because, and I'll just be kind of straightforward here, the Gladys Porter Zoo is not exorbitantly wealthy. And a lot of bigger zoos with bigger budgets have in-house behavior research programs. with whole departments and a vast array of computers and behavior technicians whose full-time job is monitoring the behavior of the various animal collections. And we don't have that. But what I've tried to do is to provide an informal behavior research department. And the students have allowed a great deal of data collection to take place. And it hasn't all been just primates. In the animal behavior course, I started expanding that, talking to other curators and to keepers. And so we had projects on hornbills and rhinos and flamingos and a lot of species in addition to the primates that were at the time closest to my heart. But the fact that the students got to know, as you said, individual animals, that makes a huge difference. I mentioned that I asked the students to learn to identify the chimpanzees and the gorillas individually, but I had ID sheets for them that described physical characteristics and gave their birth dates and some basic information about them. But before I handed those out, I asked the students to go and to stand and write physical descriptions of each individual animal in enough detail that they would know if they had seen that particular animal a few minutes before, and to turn those descriptions in. And I would give them extra credit if I could identify who the animals were that they were describing just from their physical descriptions. They got 10 points extra credit for that. Almost not very many people did. I could guess 3 or 4 of the chimps maybe, but every once in a while, the chimps are tougher than the gorillas. But they learn to see, they learn to look, and learning the different behavior categories requires a sort of mental, I talk about the discipline of a clipboard. It really causes you to not just stand there at the rail and watch, but to pay attention to what is going on a moment-to-moment basis. And that requires a very different type of seeing, of recording data. And another thing that happens is that some of these students, I've been doing this a long time, maybe not as long as you have, Pat, but a long time. And students come back to visit, and it's been mentioned that I also would teach statistics and I would teach research methods. And I tried to make those interesting, good classes too. But when students come to visit me, some of them show up from 30 years ago. And frankly, it is not statistics, it's not research methods that they want to talk about. They want to talk about the animal behavior, the primate behavior courses. And more than that, they want to know, is Rusty still there? And how is the Midoc doing? And they remember the individual animals and they care about them. Those animals stole their hearts and became part of their souls always. And the technology involved in the observation process, the data collection. I've had students use that as attorneys doing jury voir dires. I've elementary school teachers say I use this stuff every day in my classroom. There's just connections that get made in a whole variety of areas out in the world, and it's not just the zoo world or the animal world. It can touch all aspects of a student's life, and it's exciting to see that happen.
Well, I want to thank Dr. Aldridge for all of her hard work on behalf of the zoo all these many years. And I just want to say that she's well among my very favorite people and someone I look up to. And at the same time, the point she made about our zoo not rolling in money, I'd just like to point out the fact that when the Gladys Porter Zoo began in 1968, began construction and opened in 1971, we were totally financed by the Earl C. Sams Foundation, which had very deep pockets. So if we needed a new exhibit or we wanted to create another environment. We just dreamed it up and a check was written and it got constructed. But when Gladys Porter died unexpectedly in 1980, without having endowed the zoo, we suddenly went from an institution which had a very firm financial footing to one that, even though it's a 501c3 charity, if we don't make it at the gate, membership, gift shop, and concessions, we close the doors. And like many medium size zoos, the fact that Dr. Aldrich mentioned, a lot of our curators or senior staff actually hold what would amount to 2 or 3 positions at a larger institution that does have pretty great financial wherewithal. So there's a pretty big dichotomy among zoos. The very elite large zoos like San Diego, the Bronx, the Shed Aquarium, to name a few, that financially they're so well endowed that something like the COVID crisis probably didn't have the same effect it would on a place like us that actually depends on our ticket sales and gift and concessions operations to stay afloat. But again, I can't emphasize how important it is to have that student participation, to have that access to science to help us do the best job we possibly can for the welfare and contentment and happiness of our animal collection, because they are our eyes into the intricacies of the behavior of those animals on a daily basis. So if one of Dr. Aldridge's students says, hey, I think we have a problem with animal XYZ, then there's the immediate trigger that we need to see if there's something we can do to better rectify that situation. But as I said in the beginning, in my keynote, you will not find a more dedicated group of people anywhere that care more about animals than zookeepers do. Again, because they've made a conscious decision to not go for financial wealth, to do something they love and enjoy and care about, and that's the animals in their care. So we take and want all the help we can get to do the best we can do. We want to be the best we can be and do the best we can do for the animals in our charge.
I might, if I could.
Sorry, Dr. Gill had a question for you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, actually, thank you very much, Patty. I just wanted to jump in real quick. I remember as we were planning this symposium, and I have to give Wendy credit for the wonderful name, right? Animal behavior meets social science. But I remember, Wendy, when we had this conversation of wanting to engage the UTRGV community. And I think one thing as a reminder that maybe you all can, we have about 15 minutes left in the session, but I think now that we have Dr. Burchfield here, you, Wendy, and we have people from departments like sociology. I see people from education. I mean, this is a great opportunity because I remember speaking to colleagues in other departments and thinking why they can't connect animal behavior with the other disciplines. I can, and I try to explain them and tell them why it's important to have this collaboration with the zoo. So I'm wondering if you all can, at some point in the next 15 minutes, maybe kind of speak to that issue. And that's something, Wendy, you had brought up, and I think the title captures that idea. So that's my comment.
There are 2 aspects to that I would like to talk about a little bit. One is one that you and I have talked about some, Mario, and that is Intro to Psych is usually the one course that is required of all psychology majors. And something like the animal behavior course is not only not part of the psychology core, it is an elective that very few students end up taking. It's a very self-selected kind of population that enters that class. And in my view, that world should be turned upside down. I think the animal behavior course should be the single introduction to psychology course. People are animals and people are primates. And we did not just spring up in the last few minutes. And there are a lot of things that people do that don't make a whole heck of a lot of sense until you back up and get a much broader perspective. And a lot of things that humans do make much more sense when you place it in a larger taxonomic context. So that's one aspect of it. The other thing that I wanted to get into a little bit, if we could, that has to do with the second part of the title of this symposium, Animal Behavior Meets Social Sciences, is that the AZA, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, has put out from their Research and Technology Committee a social science research agenda. Now, people who do work at the zoo, out on the zoo grounds, whether they're formerly zoo staff or university people, have usually come from psychology or biology, and the work is pretty much animal oriented, not surprisingly. But this social science research agenda is getting into areas that are of great importance in the zoo world, but also at large in the community. And if I can, I think what I will do is just read quickly through the 5 research questions, key research questions that the AZA's Research and Technology Committee has proposed. And I think you'll be able to see pretty quickly why I'm interested in throwing this topic out to a broader audience. The first one is, how can zoos and aquariums help build a more equitable society through reflection on their internal operations, culture, and communications? And how can zoo and aquarium diversity, equity, access, and inclusion efforts support this? In other words, this question looks inside the profession. 2, what is the role of zoos and aquariums in communities, including the context of striving for environmental and social justice? This looks externally at the way the zoo interacts with the community around it. 3, what is the role of zoos and aquariums in contributing to social change toward conservation? That one I think is pretty straightforward. 4, what is the role of zoos and aquariums in contributing to the development of a person's intellectual, social, emotional, and physical well-being? This one's pretty much anchored in education. And finally, how can zoos and aquariums maximize their systemic impact on conservation? And that gets at worldwide kinds of support. But the AZA is expecting zoos now to examine their own internal processes with regard to efforts at increasing diversity and inclusion among employees and staff, perhaps becoming more sensitive to the relationship between the zoo and the constructs of the zoo to the surrounding community, perhaps making the zoo more immediately relevant to the community around them. And again, this is the National Accrediting Association that is coming up with this research agenda. But a lot of these issues are being presented to zoos whose staff, and these are larger social science kinds of questions, and traditional zoo staff do not have really the kind of training and background that would allow them to systematically and meaningfully, in a lot of ways, examine some of these issues. And what I was hoping we might do is plant a seed more broadly in other departments, sociology, anthropology, maybe Mexican American studies, and all of the College of Education. There are issues here that the zoo is going to be held responsible for answering, for dealing with in some way. And we need help. We need help from people trained in a lot of other areas. And I would really encourage you to think about incorporating the zoo as part of your own professional research. There's lots of room for zoo based research that goes far beyond animal behavior, but that really will be important and increasingly important in future accreditation reviews, I think. So that is an invitation, a very broad invitation from me anyway, for other people out there in the community, in public schools particularly, this business about getting students in public schools interested and involved in doing something real for this institution that is just an iconic part of the community. All of this is important, but we need your expertise, and this is an area for which the zoo will be held responsible in the future, and a big opportunity for the university in particular, I think, to provide some very strong support in these new kinds of areas. And there's the invitation. Hope there's some sociologists or anthropologists or somebody out there listening.
So I think we have, what, 7 minutes left. And I wonder if maybe we should, if there are any questions, we have to take advantage of this great opportunity. We have Dr. Burchfield, we've got Dr. Aldridge, Patty. So do we have any questions from the audience? We have faculty I can see that are connected, even students. So do we have any questions?
Well, I was actually going to ask you, part of our department is disaster studies. And I know that when it comes to hurricane season and things of that nature, maybe working in how to better help the zoo become resilient during that time, or what we can do to help. I'm just trying to think of options and programs or events that we could work on so that we can incorporate that into the core, because we have so many intro students. And we have also graduate students who are just for disaster studies, that maybe we can help in some way so that we can also contribute and maybe get grants. I'm just brainstorming right now because it's the first time I really think of it. So I thank you so much for bringing this up and for having this event. And I really appreciate it. And for me, the zoo is a magical place. I'm from the Valley, so I would go to the zoo all the time for field trips as a child and as an adult. And so I'm really grateful for that opportunity and just thinking about how I can help.
Well, as Dr. Aldrich pointed out, we need help in a lot of different directions. And you just hit my hot button when you said grants, writing grants. We don't have a development department.
Okay.
There are a couple staff members here that do all the grant writing, and we do a pretty good job. But again, that's one of our 10 jobs that we have. And we could use a lot of help in that area in terms of students that have time to research what grants are out there, what's available, what we qualify for, all these types of questions. Again, we do a very good job on the grants we do apply for, but again, we don't have a grants department or a development director. So that's one more hat that a couple senior staff have to handle in addition to their working with animals, personnel, finances, etc. So that's another area entirely. And I like Dr. Aldridge's point early on when she was talking about humans are animals, they are primates. And one of the things I used to like to point out to my classes when I taught them was our biology and our sociology don't necessarily work together, because as biological animals, and I'll just say it outright, depending on where you are and what culture or what area, ladies tend to become able to reproduce anywhere from 9 to 13 years of age. But in our present day sociology, those people of Western European background have a tendency not to want to have children until they're in their 30s, because it's not economically feasible to send them to college, to clothe them, to feed them, et cetera. So again, whether it's religion, economics, whatever, our biology and our sociology are at odds ends because we are an animal. And to her point, we need to know about our animal background to do a better job of understanding our social realities.
So there's a question in the chat, which I think is really exciting. We have an art major in the audience, which is exciting. Kimberly, can you unmute? I mean, I can read your question, but we'd love to hear your voice. Kimberly Sandoval.
Hi, yeah, sorry. As Dr. Gill mentioned, I'm an art major, and my thesis focuses at the moment, focuses on snake conservation and conservation efforts and education around snake ecology. And I was wondering if there were any opportunities at the zoo for further herpetological research.
That was herpetology was what you said?
Yes.
Yeah. Pat?
Well, right now, our reptile curator, Clint Guadiana, is working with herpetologists at UTB and a couple other places. They've got all kinds of projects going. There's lots of opportunities.
Excellent. And we can connect you, Kimberly, if you want to reach out to the team that we organize the symposium, and we'll give you information how you can reach out to Dr. Aldridge and others at the zoo. And then a final, we're running out of time, but I think we can put in a question from Renee. Would you like to, we're going to have you unmute. Are you able to ask your question? You have your hand up.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. Hi. I had to join late. I'm sorry. This is Dr. Nank. I'm in the Public Administration and Security Studies program. I also have an interest in disaster management, and I focus in nonprofit management as well. So I have experience grant writing, and I missed the woman's name who just asked the question about disaster management, but I'm thinking of opportunities for things like a weather crisis and some sort of evacuation strategies for both shelter and zoo animals. Now, they couldn't necessarily be housed together, but a disaster plan could certainly cover across those areas. I know San Antonio has a disaster plan where they'll relocate all the shelter animals. I don't know about the zoo, but all the shelter animals, they have a staging area, they have a plan for that. And it seems like, a way to both create a safe outcome in the event of a natural disaster, as well as to attract additional grant dollars. Not that there aren't other grant opportunities, but grant dollars for that kind of collaboration, I think, would be seen as pretty innovative and a new funding stream.
Well, we'd certainly be open to that. We do have our own in-house disaster plans, especially for hurricanes, since we have to prepare for them every year.
Right.
All of our major buildings have generators, and we can run for several days, and we can run for up to a month with the food that we have on hand in our reefers to feed our animal collection.
Wow.
Fortunately for the zoo, yeah, actually you could live at the zoo probably better than the rest of the community during a hurricane, because the zoo was built right after Hurricane Beulah. All the island exhibits, the top of them is 5 feet above the highest recorded water level from Hurricane Beulah, which was the biggest water event we've ever had in the Rio Grande Valley. So we were fortunate that the zoo was built right after that. But again, like this freeze event we had, we were in very good shape because of our generators. We had electricity when most areas didn't, but we did find some things that we certainly could use some help writing grants for, in terms of on-site additional holding and maybe other big generators that would help us get through something like that. But unless all of South Texas is 10 feet underwater, the zoo's in pretty good shape.
Well, that's very fortunate, and that's a sign of some good planning. So I give you the props, as they say.
Well, again, the thing is, we've been through several hurricanes here at the zoo, and until this freeze episode, We'd only been closed one day in the history of the zoo, and it took us one day to clean up after Hurricane Allen.
Wow. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was thinking more in the event of the freeze, which was something that virtually
well,
nobody was prepared
we
for.
have some things that we could use in that regard, and I'd love to talk to you in terms of potential grants, and we can talk with Dr. James and other animal staff to see what things we could do to bolster against that. Because I also remember in 1983 and 84, we had 2 freeze events back to back. And so with the weather extremes being as they are, and just dramatic weather changing worldwide, I won't be surprised if we get another one. I hope we don't, because it's always a major problem for everyone in terms of brownouts, blackouts, etc. But we certainly want to be more prepared than we were this time, although we did a pretty good job. We didn't lose a single animal.
Yeah, that's amazing.
We can do better. And so I'd love to talk with you and Dr. Aldrich and animal staff to see what we need and work on some potential grants.
Okay. All right. Well, I know you're getting near the end, so I'm going to mute myself.
Well, we thank you all so much for your questions, for your participation, and definitely to our panel. We'd like to thank all of you for being here. We do have one other session right after this one. I want to just be cognizant of your time. And so we're a little bit over time. I know that if you would like to jump into that other session, please do feel free to do so, especially as students that are asked to be there. There was one question I think that could probably be answered really quickly, and I just don't want to leave it out there. Mayela had asked, given that your tight budget, is it realistic to see that the zoo would implement any live shared footage of animals 24/7?
Yeah, there's a good possibility of that, but we'd have to pick the species and the opportunities. I know at another local institution, Sea Turtle Inc. has cameras in their tanks, and you can follow the turtle swimming around a tank for 24/7. But yeah, there's probably some areas that we could do that.
Maybe as a educational experience, we can do adopt an animal and they get to see the animal 24/7 as a way of being educational at maybe the high school and elementary and also higher education, but also allowing the community to see them if they like, by giving that donation for their adoption.
Well, we can certainly discuss that with staff and see what possibilities we can come up with.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, we're all wanting to see the zoo animals all the time. Well, thank you all so much. And so with that, we invite you to join the last session, and you should have received an email if you registered. We do want to thank you all for being here. Thank you, Mrs. Salinas, Dr. Carreon, Dr. Burchfield, Dr. Aldridge, Patty, right, and Dr. Mcwhorter, Claudia, I think I got everyone. We appreciate your time, and you have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Be safe.